I was standing in my stepfather's living room when he told me to leave, and for a second, I actually thought he was joking. The Thanksgiving decorations were still up. The turkey was still on the table. My 9-year-old daughter Lily was sitting right there on the couch, watching everything unfold with those big, confused eyes of hers. Daniel straightened up from his chair, crossed his arms, and said to me with a voice that left zero room for debate, "I think it's time for you to go, Olivia." The moment those words landed, my chest tightened. Not from sadness, from the cold, sharp clarity of finally seeing things for what they were. Before I could even process it, Rachel stepped forward from across the room and pointed at me, her voice rising as she said directly to my face, "That money isn't yours. It was never yours." The whole room went dead quiet. I looked at Lily. Then I looked back at both of them. And right there, I said the one sentence that made everyone freeze. I told them, "Then you don't get a single dollar." At that moment, I didn't know that everything had actually started 6 months earlier, the day I got that phone call. Hi everyone, my name is Olivia Carter. I'm 38 years old, and the story I'm about to tell you started on a random Tuesday morning in my office. Nothing about that day felt special. I had 2 property showings lined up, a stack of paperwork on my desk, and a lukewarm cup of coffee I kept forgetting to drink. That was my life. Not glamorous, not miserable, just steady. I'd been working as a real estate agent in Phoenix for almost 11 years. I built that career from scratch, no connections, no safety net, just a lot of cold calls and late nights and learning to smile through rejection. I was also raising my daughter Lily on my own, and honestly, she was the whole reason I kept pushing. Everything I did for her. So yeah, life was fine, manageable, but fine doesn't leave much room for surprises. That Tuesday, my phone rang around 10 in the morning. The caller introduced himself as a lawyer handling the estate of my Aunt Patricia. I remember I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen for a second, like I'd misheard him. Patricia was my mom's older sister. She never married, never had kids, and she'd spent most of her life doing exactly what she wanted. Traveling, painting, living quietly on her own terms. She was also the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was worth something. Not as a comparison to Rachel, not as a disappointment, just as me. When the lawyer told me the number she'd left behind, I had to sit down. It wasn't life-changing money for someone like Elon Musk, but for a single mom in Phoenix carrying a mortgage and a car payment, it was everything. I sat there in my office for a long time after I hung up, feeling grateful and stunned and something else I couldn't quite name. A quiet unease, like a door had just opened in a house I thought I knew. I thought the hardest part would be deciding what to do with the money. I was wrong. I didn't grow up poor, but I grew up invisible. That's the only way I know how to describe it. We had a house, we had food, we had everything that looks fine from the outside. But inside that house, there was a pecking order, and I was always at the bottom of it. My mom remarried when I was 7. Daniel came into our lives with his steady job, his firm handshake, and his very obvious preference for Rachel. Maybe it wasn't intentional at first, but kids notice everything, and I noticed. Rachel was 2 years younger than me, and from the time Daniel moved in, she became the centerpiece of every room. When Rachel got a B on a test, everyone celebrated. When I got an A, my mom would smile and say something like, "See? You can do it when you try." Like my success was an accident, like it needed an explanation. Daniel barely looked at me during those years. Not with cruelty, exactly. More like indifference, the kind that's almost worse, because at least anger means someone sees you. He'd ruffle Rachel's hair at the breakfast table, and then just look past me, like I was part of the furniture. I used to tell myself it didn't bother me. I got pretty good at believing that for a while. The comparisons were constant. Rachel was more social, more likable, more easygoing. Olivia's too serious. Olivia's too quiet. Olivia needs to loosen up. I heard those things so many times that I started to wonder if they were true. I started shrinking myself down, staying out of the way, not asking for much, so I wouldn't have to deal with the disappointment on their faces when I asked for something and they said no. By the time I was in high school, I had basically figured out how to be self-sufficient. Not because anyone taught me, because I had to be. I got a part-time job at 16. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I didn't ask Daniel and my mom for college money because I already knew the answer would come wrapped in conditions I couldn't meet. And through all of it, the one person who never made me feel like a burden was Patricia. My aunt would call me on random weeknights just to check in. Not to compare me to Rachel, not to give me advice I didn't ask for, just to talk. She'd ask about my classes, my friends, what I was reading, what I was thinking about. She treated me like my opinions mattered. Like I was a full human being, not a problem to be managed. I remember one time, I was maybe 15, and I'd had a particularly rough week at home. I called her from my bedroom with the door locked, and I told her I felt like no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said to me with complete certainty, "You don't need their approval to be worth something." You never did. I didn't fully understand what she meant back then. But I held on to those words for years. They became something I'd pull out whenever things got hard, a small, quiet reminder that at least one person in my family saw me clearly. When I became a mom myself, I promised Lily I would never make her feel the way I felt growing up. That promise cost me a lot over the years. It meant setting limits with people who didn't like limits. It meant choosing Lily over keeping the peace. And it meant that when Patricia left me everything, I wasn't just receiving money. I was receiving the final, undeniable proof that someone had always believed in me, even when I had trouble believing in myself. That's why, when she left me everything, I should have known it wouldn't stay quiet. The room went silent the second my name was read. I mean completely silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses down on your shoulders and makes it hard to breathe. The lawyer's office was small and neutral, the kind of place designed to feel like it belongs to no one. Beige walls, a long table, chairs that were slightly too stiff to be comfortable. My mom sat to my left. Rachel sat across from me. Daniel was next to her, one hand flat on the table like he was steadying himself. And the lawyer, a quiet man named Miss Hoffman, sat at the head of the table with a folder open in front of him, reading in that calm, measured tone lawyers use when they're delivering information that will detonate someone's life. He said my name, Olivia Carter, sole beneficiary. The entirety of Patricia's estate, her savings, her property, her investments, everything, left to me. I felt my face go completely still. My hands were in my lap and I pressed them together, not because I was excited, but because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with them. The number was real. The will was real. And then I made the mistake of looking up. Rachel's expression shifted so fast it was almost impressive. 1 second she was sitting there composed, the next her jaw had tightened and her eyes had gone somewhere cold and hard. She looked at me the way you look at someone who just cut in front of you in line. Not just annoyed, but personally offended, like I had done something to her deliberately. My mom's face was harder to read. She blinked a few times, looked down at the table, then back at Miss Hoffman, like she was waiting for him to correct himself. Daniel didn't move at all. He just stared straight ahead with that flat, unreadable expression he'd perfected over 30 years of being a man who never showed anything he didn't choose to show. Mr. Hoffman explained that Patricia had also left a short video message. He turned his laptop toward us and pressed play. And there she was. Patricia, sitting in her living room, the same cream-colored couch I remembered from childhood visits, the same paintings on the wall behind her. She looked tired in the video, clearly recorded not long before she passed, but her voice was steady. She looked directly into the camera and said with quiet conviction, "Olivia, I know this might cause some noise. I want you to know I thought about it carefully and I have no doubts. You were the one who showed up. You were the one who called. You were the one who never asked me for anything and still gave me everything. This is yours. Use it well." The video ended. Nobody said anything for a moment. And then Rachel leaned forward and said with a voice that was trying very hard to stay controlled, There has to be a mistake somewhere in this. Mr. Hoffman calmly explained there was no mistake. Rachel looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at my mom. My mom looked at her hands. Nobody looked at me. Not to say congratulations. Not to say they were happy for me. Not even to acknowledge that I was sitting right there in the same room. Just like that, in the span of about 4 minutes, the entire dynamic shifted. I could feel it physically, like a temperature drop. The way they rearranged their faces, the way Rachel pulled back in her chair, the way Daniel's jaw tightened. They weren't grieving Patricia anymore, they were calculating. On the drive home, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before I could bring myself to start the engine. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even fully processing the money yet. I was sitting with that feeling I'd had since the phone call, that quiet, creeping unease, that something was about to come loose. Patricia had believed in me enough to leave me everything, and the people who were supposed to love me had just looked at me like I was a stranger who'd walked off with something that belonged to them. Right then, something cold settled into my stomach. That was the moment they stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as a bank. At first, they didn't ask. They suggested. That's the thing about people who are good at manipulation. They don't come at you directly right away. They warm you up first. They test the edges. They figure out exactly how much pressure you can take before they start applying more. It started about a week after the will reading. My mom called on a Wednesday evening, and her voice was warm, almost sweet, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something but hadn't worked up the nerve to say it yet. She asked how I was doing. She asked about Lily. She mentioned the weather in Phoenix like we were two neighbors making small talk over a fence. And then, almost as an afterthought, she said to me in that careful, measured way of hers, "I was just thinking, a windfall like this is a big responsibility. Patricia would have wanted it to help the whole family. Don't you think?" I didn't respond right away. The silence stretched out between us for a few seconds, and I heard her shift on the other end of the line, adjusting, recalibrating. I told her I was still figuring things out. She said, of course, no rush, and we hung up. But right after that call ended, a dull, familiar ache settled in my chest, because I'd heard that tone before. I'd grown up with that tone. It was the tone that always came right before something was expected of me. The calls kept coming after that, every few days, always friendly on the surface, always with that same undertow pulling beneath the words. My mom started bringing up what she called family responsibility, not in a demanding way, more like she was reminding me of something I'd somehow forgotten. She'd mention how Daniel's retirement savings weren't where they needed to be. She'd bring up how Rachel was dealing with some credit card debt from a rough couple of years. She framed it all so carefully, never asking directly, just painting a picture and waiting to see if I'd volunteer to step into it. Rachel's approach was different. She wasn't warm about it. She was strategic. She started sending me articles. I'm not even kidding. Actual links, texted to me without comment, about things like how inherited wealth affects family dynamics and why keeping money in the family matters. One night she sent me something about siblings and financial fairness, and I just sat there staring at my phone, genuinely not knowing whether to laugh or put it through the wall. Then came the passive-aggressive comments, the ones that showed up in group texts and family chats like little landmines. Things like must be nice when I mentioned anything about my week, or a pointed silence whenever anyone brought up Patricia's name, followed by a meaningful look in my direction. One afternoon I posted a photo of Lily and me at the park on my personal page. Just a regular Sunday, the two of us on a blanket with sandwiches. Within an hour, Rachel had commented with a single word, cute. And somehow, in the context of everything happening, that one word felt like a verdict. I started dreading my phone. I'd see my mom's name light up the screen and my stomach would drop a little before I even answered. I started keeping my responses short and non-committal. Yes. No. I'll think about it. I'm still figuring things out. I became fluent in deflection because it was the only way to buy myself time without setting anything on fire. But here's the thing about deflection. It only works for so long. Because the people on the other side of it know exactly what you're doing. And when they realize the soft approach isn't getting them anywhere, they don't back off. They just change tactics. I remember one night sitting at the kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed, just staring at my phone with all those unanswered messages sitting there and thinking that this was supposed to be a good thing. Patricia had left me something extraordinary. She had chosen me, deliberately, thoughtfully, on purpose. And instead of feeling grateful and free, I felt hunted, like the money had painted a target on my back and everyone in my family was lining up for a shot. That night, a quiet, exhausted anger started building somewhere behind my ribs. Not the explosive kind. The slow kind. The kind that doesn't make noise right away but doesn't go away either. But suggestions didn't last long. They turned into demands. Rachel stopped pretending pretty quickly. I'll give her that much. At least when she finally dropped the act, I knew exactly where I stood. It was a Thursday night, about 3 weeks after the will reading, when my phone rang and I saw her name on the screen. Something about the timing felt off. She never called at 9 at night. She texted. She sent passive-aggressive articles. She didn't call. I picked up anyway, and before I'd even finished saying hello, she launched straight into it. Her voice was clipped and tight, the way it gets when she's already decided how a conversation is going to go before it starts. She said to me, without a single second of warm-up, "I need you to be honest with me. Do you really think you deserve that money more than the rest of us?" I felt the air go out of the room. My grip on the phone tightened, and I made myself breathe slowly before I answered. I told her I wasn't going to have this conversation right now. She pushed harder, her voice rising just slightly as she said, "You didn't earn it, Olivia. You didn't work for it. You just happened to be her favorite for whatever reason, and now you're sitting on all of it like it's yours to keep." Right then, a cold, sharp anger cut straight through me. Not the slow-burning kind I'd been carrying for weeks. This was something faster and cleaner. I told her firmly that Patricia made her wishes very clear, and the lawyer confirmed everything was legal and final. Rachel went quiet for exactly 2 seconds, and then she said in a lower, harder tone, "That money belongs to this family, and you know it." I hung up. I set my phone face down on the counter and stood there in my kitchen for a long moment, the silence pressing in around me. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I felt strangely calm, the way you feel after something you've been waiting for finally happens. Daniel came next, not with a phone call. With a text, which somehow felt even more deliberate, like he'd typed it out carefully and reread it before sending. It said, "Olivia, I think we need to sit down and talk about what's fair here. That money came from this family. It should go back to this family. I'd appreciate it if you'd consider doing the right thing." I read it 3 times. Each time, my jaw got a little tighter. The phrase "the right thing" sat in my stomach like a stone. Because what he meant, what he was very carefully, not saying directly, was that the right thing was whatever benefited him. That was the framing they'd both settled on. Not greed, never greed. Just fairness. Just family. Just doing what Patricia would have really wanted, as if they had any idea what Patricia wanted, as if they'd bothered to show up for her the way I had. The gaslighting started showing up in layers after that. My mom called and gently suggested that maybe I was being a little defensive, that nobody was trying to attack me, that the family just wanted to feel included. Rachel sent a long message walking back the phone call, saying she hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that she was just emotional and grieving, but then ending the message with, "I just think you need to ask yourself what kind of person you want to be." I stared at that last line for a long time. What kind of person did I want to be? As if my character was the thing on trial here. As if my worth was still something that needed to be proven to people who had never once handed it to me freely. I started keeping my distance after that. I stopped responding to the group chat. I let calls go to voicemail. I gave myself permission to stop performing okayness for people who were using my guilt as leverage, but pulling back didn't stop them. It just made the messages sharper. The texts got more pointed. The voicemails got longer. And the one that finally made my blood run cold was a message from Daniel, left on a Sunday afternoon while Lily and I were at the grocery store. He said in a flat, deliberate voice, "You need to understand that what you're doing right now has consequences. For all of us. Including that little girl of yours." I stood in the cereal aisle and listened to that message twice. Lily was 2 steps ahead of me, comparing granola bars, completely unbothered, completely unaware. And something shifted in me right then. Something fundamental and irreversible. That's when it stopped being uncomfortable and started becoming toxic. My daughter was the first one to notice. That's the thing about kids. They don't have the filters adults spend years building up. They see what's actually there, not what people are pretending to show. Lily had always been perceptive, even as a little girl. She picked up on shifts in energy the way some people pick up on changes in weather. She didn't always have the words for it, but she felt it. And what she started feeling in those weeks after the will reading was that something in the world around her had quietly changed. It started at a cousin's birthday party about a month after everything went sideways. My mom's neighbor hosted it, one of those backyard things with a bounce house and too much sugar and kids running everywhere. Lily had always gotten along with Rachel's kids. They weren't close exactly, but they were comfortable with each other, the way cousins are when family gatherings are still relatively functional. That afternoon, something was different. I watched from across the yard as Lily walked up to Rachel's daughter Emma and tried to join a game the other kids were playing. Emma looked at her for a second, then looked back at the other kids and just turned away. No explanation. No acknowledgement. Just a wall going up where a door used to be. Lily stood there for a moment, not understanding, and then quietly walked back toward me. She didn't say anything right away. She just sat down next to me in one of the lawn chairs and picked at the edge of her paper plate. After a few minutes, she looked up at me and asked in a small, careful voice, "Did I do something wrong?" Right then, my chest cracked open. I kept my face steady because I didn't want her to see what that question did to me. I told her with as much warmth as I could pull together, "No, baby. You didn't do a single thing wrong." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that answer away, but wasn't fully convinced by it. And I sat there next to her, watching the other kids play, feeling something harden inside me that I don't think has ever fully softened back. That wasn't the only time. A few weeks later, we ran into Rachel at a shopping center near our neighborhood. It was completely unplanned, just one of those random Phoenix afternoons where the city feels too small. Rachel was with Emma, and for a moment, all 4 of us were standing in the same aisle of the same store. Rachel looked at me with that flat expression she'd been wearing since the will reading, gave me a nod that barely qualified as acknowledgement, and then crouched down to talk to Emma about something on a shelf, completely bypassing Lily like she wasn't standing right there. Emma followed her mom's lead without even thinking about it, the way kids do when they absorb the behavior of the adults around them. Lily watched it happen. She didn't say anything in the store. She waited until we were back in the car, seatbelt clicked, parking lot pulling away behind us, and then she said quietly while staring out the window, "Aunt Rachel doesn't really like us anymore, does she?" I kept my eyes on the road. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard before answering. I told her as evenly as I could. Sometimes adults have disagreements that have nothing to do with kids. It's not about you. Lily thought about that for a moment, and then said with the devastating simplicity that only a 9-year-old can manage, "But it feels like it's about me." I didn't have an answer for that, because she wasn't wrong. It did feel that way. And no amount of careful adult framing was going to change what she was experiencing in real time. The coldness, the exclusion, the way the people who were supposed to be her family had decided that punishing me was worth making a little girl feel like she'd done something to deserve being invisible. That night, after Lily was in bed, I sat on the edge of the couch in the dark for a long time. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to be reasonable, all the calls I'd deflected instead of confronted. All the messages I'd let sit unanswered because I kept telling myself that space would help, that things would settle, that people who had known me my whole life would eventually remember that I was a person and not a target. But they had pulled Lily into it, maybe not deliberately. Maybe it was just the collateral damage of adults who were too caught up in their own resentment to think about a 9-year-old who had done absolutely nothing to anyone. But the effect was the same either way. My daughter was sitting in cars asking if she'd done something wrong. My daughter was standing at the edge of birthday parties watching cousins turn their backs on her. My daughter was learning, at 9 years old, that family is sometimes the place where you are most likely to get hurt. I had spent my entire childhood in that lesson. I had promised myself she wouldn't have to. That night, something in my thinking quietly reorganized itself. The question stopped being, how do I fix this with my family? It became, how do I protect my kid from these people? That night, I realized something. This wasn't about money anymore. I told myself I would give them one last chance. Looking back now, I understand exactly what that was. It was hope. Stubborn, irrational, completely human hope that the people who raised me still had something decent left in them, underneath all the ugliness that had been surfacing for weeks. I wanted to believe that if I showed up with something real, something generous, they would remember who I was to them and act accordingly. So I made a plan. I sat down one Saturday morning at my kitchen table with a notepad and my laptop and I started running numbers. I wasn't going to hand anyone a blank check. I wasn't going to let guilt make the decision for me. But I thought if I came in with something structured, something reasonable, maybe it would diffuse the whole situation. I figured I'd set aside a specific amount, enough to genuinely help without gutting what I needed to secure Lily's future. The idea was to cover Daniel and my mom's most immediate financial pressure, give Rachel something that would address her debt without rewarding the behavior that had made the past several weeks so brutal. I wrote it all out. I even went as far as drafting what I wanted to say, keeping it simple and direct. No groveling, no apology for receiving what Patricia had freely given me, just a clear offer and a clear expectation that this would be the end of the pressure. I told myself this was the mature move, the high road. The kind of thing you do when you want to be able to look yourself in the mirror and know you tried everything before you walked away. Lily didn't want to go. That should have been the sign I listened to. The night before Thanksgiving, I told her we were going to Grandma and Daniel's for dinner the next day, and she got very still in that way she does when she's trying to figure out how to say something she thinks might upset me. After a moment, she said carefully, looking up at me from her homework, "Do we have to?" I crouched down to her level and told her as gently as I could, "I think we should try one more time, okay? Sometimes people need a chance to do better." She looked at me with those steady, serious eyes of hers and then nodded, not because she agreed, but because she trusted me. That trust sat heavily in my chest the whole next morning as I got us both ready. I kept the offer in my head like a script I was rehearsing. I'd arrive, I'd get through the meal, and at some point, I'd pull Daniel and my mom aside and lay out the plan clearly and calmly. I'd give them the number, I'd give them the terms, and then we'd see if they were actually interested in repairing something, or if they just wanted the money. I drove to their house with Lily in the back seat, her dressed in the little burgundy sweater she'd picked out herself. Her hair in 2 neat braids she'd asked me to do twice because the first ones weren't even enough. She was trying. Even after everything she'd already felt and seen, she was still putting on her good sweater and sitting up straight and being willing to try. That detail alone almost made me turn the car around. But I kept driving, because I had convinced myself that generosity was the answer, that showing up with an open hand would remind everyone what actually mattered. I had built a whole version of that evening in my head where the tension broke and something real got repaired and Lily got to have her family back. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment before cutting the engine. The house looked exactly the same. Lights on, cars parked along the curb, the smell of food drifting out even from outside. Everything looked normal. Everything looked fine. I thought generosity would fix everything. I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment I walked in, I knew nothing had changed. It wasn't anything specific at first. Just the air. The way a room can feel completely normal on the surface and completely wrong underneath, like a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. My mom greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted about 1 second too short to feel real. She looked at Lily and said with the kind of brightness that doesn't quite land, "Oh, look at you, so pretty." Lily smiled politely the way I'd watched her learn to smile when she wasn't sure how to feel. Daniel didn't come to the door at all. I could see him from the entryway, settled into his armchair in the living room, talking to one of his old friends from the neighborhood. He glanced over when we walked in, gave me a single nod, and went back to his conversation. No hello, no acknowledgement of Lily, just a nod, like I was the mail carrier dropping something off. Rachel was already there, sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine, looking polished and composed in a way that felt intentional, like she'd dressed for a performance. When she saw me, she tilted her head slightly and said with a smile that didn't move her eyes, "Olivia, glad you could make it." The words were fine. The tone was a verdict. I got Lily settled on the couch with her tablet and her headphones and told her quietly that dinner would be ready soon. She nodded and put her headphones on with the focused efficiency of a kid who had already decided she was going to get through this evening by retreating somewhere safe inside herself. That observation sat in my chest like a splinter. The first hour was all surface. Dishes passed around the table, conversations about nothing, the particular performance of a family that has agreed not to explode yet. Rachel talked about a promotion she was angling for at work, and Daniel listened with the warm, engaged expression he reserved exclusively for things that had nothing to do with me. My mom kept jumping up to refill things, staying in motion the way she always does when the tension in a room gets to a level she can't manage. I sat quietly and worked through my plate and kept rehearsing the offer in my head, waiting for the right moment to pull Daniel and my mom aside. And then Rachel set down her wine glass, looked across the table, and said in a voice loud enough for the whole table to hear, "So Olivia, have you given any more thought to what you're planning to do with everything?" The table went quiet. My mom stopped mid-reach for the bread basket. Daniel looked up from his plate. I felt every set of eyes in the room recalibrate in my direction. I kept my voice even and told her this probably wasn't the right time to get into it. Rachel smiled and said lightly, like it was the most casual observation in the world, "I just think it's something we should all be able to talk about openly. As a family." The word family landed in the room like something dropped on purpose. Before I could respond, Daniel put his fork down and leaned back in his chair and said with the flat authority of a man who had been waiting all evening to say exactly this, "She's right. We've been patient, Olivia, but patience has a limit. That money came from this family's roots, and it's time to have an honest conversation about what's right." Right then, my throat tightened. I looked at my mom. She was staring at the tablecloth, not helping, not objecting, just absent, the way she had always made herself absent when the cost of speaking up felt too high. I started to say that I had actually come prepared to discuss something reasonable, that I had a plan, and I was willing to talk through it calmly. But Rachel cut across me, her voice sharpening as she said, "Reasonable? You've been stonewalling this family for months. You got lucky and now you want credit for being generous? That's not generosity. That's damage control." The words hit like a slap. But it was what came next that broke something open in me completely. Emma, Rachel's daughter, had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table. And in the silence after Rachel's words, Emma looked down the table at Lily and said with the casual cruelty that children learn directly from the adults around them, "My mom says your mom took money that wasn't hers." The whole room stopped. Lily pulled one headphone off and looked at Emma, then looked at me, her face open and confused, and hurt in a way that no 9-year-old's face should ever be. I looked at Rachel. Rachel picked up her wine glass. She didn't correct her daughter. She didn't even look uncomfortable. And that was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Clean and final, like a cable pulled past its limit. I set my napkin on the table. I stood up. I looked at Daniel, then at Rachel, then at my mom, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. My voice came out quieter than I expected, and steadier than I felt, as I said to all of them, "I came here tonight with a plan to help all of you. I had an amount set aside. I had terms ready. I was going to offer it tonight because I wanted to believe this family was worth one more try. I paused for just a second, long enough to make sure everyone at that table was listening. Then I said, "But after what just happened to my daughter, right here at this table, in front of everyone, then you don't get a single dollar. Not one." The room went absolutely still. And I went to get my daughter's coat. 8 months have passed since that Thanksgiving night, and my life looks completely different now. Not louder, not more dramatic. Actually quieter, in the best possible way. The first thing I did when I got home that night was sit on the edge of Lily's bed after she'd fallen asleep and just watch her breathe for a while. She'd been quiet the whole drive home, her forehead leaning against the car window, watching the Phoenix streetlights go by. When I'd tucked her in, she looked up at me and said in a small voice, "Are we okay?" I smoothed her hair back and told her with everything I had, "Yeah, baby, we're more than okay." And I meant it. In the months that followed, I paid off the mortgage on our house. Completely. No more payment hanging over every month like a threat. I set up a college fund for Lily that will cover 4 years wherever she wants to go. No conditions, no strings, just options. I also created a small scholarship through a local foundation in Patricia's name for first-generation college students in Phoenix who are doing it the hard the way Patricia always respected, the way I always had to. I haven't spoken to Rachel or Daniel since that night. My mom reached out twice. The first time I didn't answer. The second time I picked up and listened, and what I heard was another version of the same conversation. Careful, indirect, waiting to see if enough time had passed to try again. I told her gently but clearly that I wished her well, and that I needed her to stop calling. The silence that followed wasn't angry, it was just honest. Lily started 4th grade this year, and she is, without question, the happiest I have ever seen her. She has a best friend named Cora who comes over on weekends, and the two of them take over the kitchen and make an absolute disaster, and I let them because that sound, that completely unbothered, comfortable noise of a kid who feels safe, is everything. I don't regret what I said that night. I don't regret walking out. Some people have told me I was too harsh, that family deserves more chances, that I'll feel differently someday. Maybe. But here's what I know right now. Patricia didn't leave me that money to hand it over to people who made me feel worthless my entire life. She left it to me because she saw me clearly, and she wanted me to finally have something solid to stand on. So let me ask you, if you were in my place, would you have walked away, or stayed and kept trying?